So we're going to start out with a presentation from Carol Upshur from Village of Bronxville. We're thrilled to have her in today's cohort meeting number 12. Then we're going to do a Q&A with Caroline on reduction measure modeling. So if you guys have any questions, now's the time to ask. We'll split into our mini cohort support groups for about 12, 15 minutes, just to catch up and discuss a few things, and then we'll come back and I will go over some climate action plan template considerations and talk about announcements and next steps. And before we jump into Carol's presentation, I also wanted to introduce you all to Dominique Etienne. She's our new intern. She is an undergraduate at Sullivan County Community College, working for SUNY Sullivan currently. So we're thrilled to have her. And hopefully she'll be helping out with a variety of CAPI related activities. So welcome, Etienne, Dominique. I will turn it over to Carol. Carol, I think among her many accomplishments, has been a force behind the Village of Bronxville's Government Operations Climate Action Plan, which I believe has just been approved. Is that right, Carol?
Correct, yes. The trustees adopted it officially in November.
Fantastic. Congratulations. That's a huge accomplishment.
Sure, for sure.
And I know that you're also a professor, is that correct? At the University of
Yes, I'm a full professor at UMass Medical School, semi-retired.
Wonderful. Well, we're thrilled to have you today, and I have given you sharing capability. So if you want to take over, feel free to get going when you're ready.
Okay, well, now I have the challenge of finding my presentation. Let's see. Can you guys see this coming up?
We're seeing your screen, but we're not seeing the actual PowerPoint. We're seeing the...
Okay, it says I'm screen sharing, so...
Yes, you are screen sharing, but you're screen sharing your documents drive, not the actual presentation.
Oh, so the actual presentation is on my... okay, let me start it. Let me try it one more time.
There you go. Yep, perfect.
Oh, it came up?
You did.
Wait, now I have to find it again. Sorry about this. You see it now?
Well, now we're seeing your documents folder again.
It's so weird. Oh gosh. Now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. So sorry, you can tell I don't do this every day. So I'm going to just give a hopefully it'll take me a few minutes to get through this, just how we put together our plan. And I understand you all are working with ICLEI, and we worked with ICLEI on our greenhouse gas inventory. But when you guys were starting the cohort to work on greenhouse gas, we were already done. So that's why we didn't join you, but I'm very jealous because I think you guys have a lot of good resources and support in doing your work. I hope Mary will share this with you, but the important thing would be to go load our plan up in our greenhouse gas inventory if you have questions, because I'm just going to show you a few of screenshots of different parts of our report and talk about how we made put it together. But you might want to look at our actual report. So this is our logo, and the reason why this was important is because we went back and forth with figuring out whether we were going to be able to meet a 50% goal or a 40% goal. And Bronxville was pretty new getting into doing the climate planning compared to a few other communities in Westchester. And we picked the state goal because we thought that would be very defensible to the trustees. And reaching further, we worried about how, we didn't want to have disappointments and so forth. And we participated in a different support group around developing climate action plans. And it was organized around these 4 sectors. And I'm not sure how you guys are organizing, but anyway, we were to consider these 4 sectors for greenhouse gas reduction. So that became our logo. We ended up with 39 action steps, which is a lot. But what we did is we took each of the sectors and the recommendations and the climate smart communities actions and tried to parse out, well, what was achievable and what, you know, would actually make an impact. And this is just an example of how we showed these. We actually put it all on one page with the 4 sectors and then breaking down the steps. So this is just an example for transportation. We had 2 areas, our village fleet and employee commute, which is, you know, probably a little harder to get change in because you know, we have control over what vehicles we buy, but, you know, we have to do encouragement and education and so forth for employee commutes. And this is in terms of natural resources and so forth. You know, we're a very small community that's fully developed. We don't have forests and acres and lots of green space. So there isn't a whole lot we could do, but we also know that the ambiance of the community is important and people here care a lot about the green spaces. So we did try to put in some things around natural resources, but as you'll see, the main area we're going to get reductions is going to be building operations, street lighting, and then the transportation sector. So this is a graphic that I developed. One of the things is a lot of people have trouble reading graphs and so forth. And so I try to present things multiple different ways in terms of graphing, and it's something that, you know, I'm used to doing in my professional life. And so the red line is our current or our baseline greenhouse gas emissions megatons for various parts, you know, various operations, you know, the fleet, the employee commute, the buildings, and street lighting. And you notice that things like natural resources and so forth aren't on there. And that's because, as maybe you've also learned, it's really hard to estimate how much greenhouse gas reduction you might get from planting, you know, 50 trees. And so we really focused on the high level ones. And also, I believe ClearPath models those best. So this is our ClearPath model, and maybe you guys have already done this, but the top blue line was our baseline greenhouse gas emissions, and it goes down, as you probably know, because there's assumptions that electricity is going to get cleaner and so forth over time, and vehicles are going to get cleaner. So there's some reduction. But then we built in our key areas where we thought we would get reductions: the employee commute, the vehicle fleet, buildings, operations, and street lights. And that's, so we didn't model some of the other things. And one of our volunteers said, this graph does not look like we're getting 40% reduction. It's kind of somehow it's hard to read. And that's why we try to do a lot of other kinds of graphing in our report. So I'm sure you're very familiar with Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and those are the key targets pretty much for greenhouse gas inventories as well as for your planning, because those are where the municipality or the government, you know, has most control. You know, how much fuel is burned in its vehicles, how much natural gas is used, and then how much electricity is used for municipal operations. We have a unique factor that something like, well, we have no garbage or waste treatment in our community. We don't have sewage treatment in our community. And we also don't even operate or own directly our own firehouse. It's operated by the town of Eastchester, which we contract with. So we don't have direct control over that either. So for us, that means that we have kind of a limited way we can really address greenhouse gases. But our greenhouse gas emission report really identified the biggest areas. So it wasn't hard to see, well, where are most of our emissions coming from? The data really helped. We did use the software to model different reductions that we thought we would try to achieve. But just showing the high level of what the megatons were, really impressed the trustees. And also we compared it to other communities, so we have some very big success stories just by them realizing, oh, there's some things we can easily do, and we're really behind, and let's just do it. So comparing yourself and learning from other communities is really important, and that's why I'm glad you all have that opportunity. So in terms of the software, it's hard to learn, which you've probably experienced, and a little clunky. And the sectors that you can model are somewhat limited. You can't model trees, I don't think. But we could model, we really ambitiously wanted all our vehicles to be electric. That was our first thing. But then we knew that there were technical obstacles and philosophical obstacles and yada, yada. And so I ran, it all with electric vehicles. And of course, we saved a lot more, but then we had to back off a little bit and go to hybrids for some of the vehicles. And so using the software to model different scenarios, and I kept fiddling around with it until we got to 40%, which is probably the same thing you're doing. So I just want to point that out. And also for some things, one of our volunteers is saying like, oh, we're using too much water in our, sprinkler systems in our parks or whatever, we need to cut back. Well, we don't know really accurately how much greenhouse gas that represents at all. It represents obviously a sustainable resource, but maybe not a greenhouse gas reduction. But still, if we reduce water consumption, that would still be something to show in a plan in terms of sustainability. So in terms of showing what we might achieve, this is one of the graphs I completed, and I showed first for the fleet and then for employee commuting. And in fact, what's interesting is we calculated in our inventory that employee commuting accounted for actually more greenhouse gas emissions than our actual fleet, because we're a small community. We're in Westchester. We're actually right on a train line, but a lot of the employees live a far distance away. How did we know that? We did a survey. I mean, it was really revealing about commutes. So what are we going to do about it? Well, hopefully we can reassess. We can, I know some communities give out free bus passes, free train passes. We're going to try to do education and promote greener commutes. And since we started talking about this, I've had different employees come up to me and say, oh, I got a hybrid. I got an EV. I got a hybrid. So it's actually moving in that direction. And here's our buildings and operations graph. Now, one of the things you can see, our biggest reduction is going to be in the street lighting, which is a great success for us because we hadn't done anything. And we also saw in our greenhouse gas inventory that was a pretty big emission factor. And by changing to LED street lights, we have 600 plus street lights that got changed. We could really save a lot. And that's actually going to be probably a third of the greenhouse gases emissions that we reduce. And we've already done it, which is really great. Kudos to our trustees, because as soon as they saw how out of whack we were with other communities, they immediately allocated funds to change every light bulb in the community. And they did it within like 18 months. So that was great. But you can also see that the buildings are pretty high and we aren't going to be able to reduce that too much. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But so we concluded that we really had to do some solar development. And a lot of communities have done solar and we haven't. And part of it is that we developed a brand new DPW building that was supposed to have solar. And the first attempt to get an array installed just didn't work. We didn't get the grant. And so the staff and the trustees just kind of gave up on that. But now we have to revisit it. And that's going to be one of the more difficult ones to revisit and figure out how to finance and so forth. So those are just examples, and there's lots of graphics in our report, and I urge you to go to it. So our approach was really to think about a lot of the low cost and practical steps that we're not doing that we can get into the report that would also then promote, kind of a sense of success and the sense we're doing something while we're tackling some of these harder things like getting solar installed and actually converting the fleet, which is going to be another hard issue. So things like energy audits, the buildings hadn't been audited in a long time, and they hadn't been really audited in terms of the energy efficiency, but our village hall, good 2008, 2009, did have a geothermal system installed, which was wonderful. So we were way ahead of the curve on that, but it doesn't cover the whole building. So we're still burning 4,000 gallons a winter of heating oil there. So that's something we really have to figure out, how to get it more efficient. And so an energy audit would be very useful. Things like, do we have the right number of police vehicles? What are their routes? What are the garbage routes? Is there any way we can save there? Again, this might be a small thing, but every incremental change can help us ratchet up to that 40%. Also things just like shutting off office equipment overnight. I don't believe we do that, but putting, activated light switches so lights aren't on when people aren't in a room and things like that. Maybe set back thermostats, all those little things, what we're counting on and hoping will reduce our building energy drain, a percentage point or so a year, and cumulatively then will give us maybe a 10% improvement. And the reason why we're doing that is because we already have the geothermal system in Village Hall. So we've really got to figure out how to be more efficient. They're probably not going to, want to put in a new system. Our library, which is the other big village building, they had just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on upgrading the HVAC. Now, it's more efficient than it was, but it's still a traditional natural gas, heating and electric cooling system, but it's brand new. So we're not going to be able to change that really feasibly, I think, and convince the trustees to spend more money right away. Eventually that equipment's going to need to be replaced, but in the meantime, we're really going to focus on energy efficiency in our buildings, and then hoping that we can develop solar to have the offset to increase our balance of by 2030. We don't have municipal waste, we don't have a dump, we don't have a landfill, we don't have water treatment, but those are all things that are very complicated and could be other sources of energy savings. Although I know a lot of the systems are already trash to energy, natural gas is created and so forth. But again, I think those are things to explore, and which we didn't have the option of. The other important thing I think to think about is what's changing in your community. And we're kind of lucky, maybe, is that our community can't change. It's only 1 square mile. It's fully developed. And there's not going to be a mall going in, or a new industrial plant or a huge Wegmans going in or anything like that. But maybe in your town, there is going to be development, or there's open land where there's going to be new apartment multi-unit housing put in and so forth. So if your community's growing, how do you demonstrate greenhouse gas reductions? I hope that's a topic that you guys are trying to take into account. So I think it's complicated then, but you've got to anticipate that, and then anticipate then, well, if it's new development, how do we make it as green as possible? And how do we reduce the emissions, even though we're growing? Our population isn't even changing in Bronxville by more than a couple hundred over a decade. Again, it's a very small community. So those are important things. Also, what the specific climate threats are to your community. I think most communities in Westchester are dealing with flooding. We're dealing with flooding. But we, particularly in our community greenhouse gas emission report, we did have a student intern, kudos to student interns, who was a climate scientist. and dug up a lot of good data about the heat factors and the flooding factors, and we had maps and everything. And so, there are more risks than just flooding. The heat is going to be an issue. And I'll just give an example. A lot of our buildings are older. A lot of our co-ops are older. There isn't central air conditioning. I live in a co-op where an elderly person was being taken care of by an aide, and plugged an air conditioner into an extension cord and started a fire. It damaged that unit. It damaged, 10 or so other units. It was a huge cost. It was a huge community response to, in terms of the fire and police and everything to deal with the initial fire. But that's a result of climate change, because it's too hot now that people can't get by without air conditioning. And so again, you have to consider what the risks are out of the box a little bit, not what the obvious ones are, but what's coming down the path, and then how to account for that. Also, in terms of our planning, we're mostly a group of volunteers. We do have a village official and a trustee meeting with us, but often we hear kind of like backhandedly, oh, we've already done that, or oh, we just bought a new police vehicle, or so forth. So keeping in touch with what the ongoing procedures are and developments and things that the village is doing was very important. One example is we're sitting here putting together the plan, and I hadn't even thought about hot water heaters in the village buildings. I'd only been thinking about the heating systems. And then I realized, oh, we're doing a clean energy campaign to promote heat pump hot water heaters for residents. Maybe we need those in the village. And I'm sitting with the assistant administrator, and he said, oh, ours just went out in Village Hall. And I said, oh, what did you replace it with? Natural gas, or heating oil, whichever fuel they were using. And they didn't even think to put in a heat pump. So again, it's catching when you have to do things to try to convince people and put thinking in place to, do the greener alternative, because that's the time. Then it's less, less objections to, well, we're throwing away money, or we're spending extra money that we don't need to. If you already need to do it, that's a good time to convince people to do something greener. I'm not going to talk about all these process suggestions because Mary said you guys are well on your way, but I will point out a few things that the brainstorming possible roadblocks and objections was really important, I think, to a smooth passing of our plan, because we anticipated, oh, isn't this going to cost a lot more? Well, for example, we'd already found out that hybrid police vehicles that are SUVs are only a couple $1,000s more than a gas police vehicle. It's kind of a no-brainer. You save that in a couple years of gas bills. We got taxpayer comments. Oh, this is going to cost so much money. Our tax bills are going to go up. Well, a lot of the things that we proposed are actually going to save the village money. We're going to save $20,000, $30,000 a year in electric costs because we converted the street lights. And we did just get some energy audits done, and the auditor showed the savings from the improvements. So it's not all negative in terms of this is just going to cost more money. Also, we really wanted to keep a broad group of the all the trustees and the mayor kind of up to date as we went along, because then we could prepare them. This is a big step. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is what we're going to commit to. And so we asked for a working meeting presentation before the public meeting and before we finalized the report, to just go over what we're thinking, and just to hear, well, what were the objections going to be? What were the worries going to be? What did they think the community, how would they react? And that way, then we could, in the text of the report, and then in the way we presented it, we were able to kind of head off some of the objections that we knew we were going to hear, and balance them out with a rationale of why, it was a good thing to do anyway. So this is an example. We did a lot of public outreach. You can use this slide and link to some of the articles we wrote. In Bronxville, we have a weekly digital, My Hometown Bronxville, and then there's a monthly print bulletin that goes to all the residents, and we had articles in both. We also have someone, one of our members, Maria Chajarian, who does social media posts. So we had a number of ways. We probably had 6 or 8 ways that we publicized the plan. We posted a draft in August, and we let people know that it was going to be on the October trustee agenda for a public presentation. So just, you know, some ideas about public outreach. So in terms of framing the report recommendations, you know, I think we really wanted it to be positive and start out like we're really doing a lot, but we need to do more. So we didn't want it to be like, we're terrible, we aren't doing anything. We wanted to invoke kind of we're part of a process that lots of communities and the world is undertaking, and we want to be part of it. We did do a discussion in the report around lots of pros and cons about different options and why we picked the option. So in terms of police vehicles, there a lot of communities have separate vehicles for detectives and investigations and different functions. And then they have the patrol vehicles, but we're a small community and we only have one type of vehicle, one big SUV, gas guzzler, that does everything because we are small and we don't have differentiated vehicles. So one of the things is that a lot of police departments tout that they have all these EVs, but it's not for patrol, because a patrol vehicle needs to have a cage in the back to lock people up if they're arresting people on the street. And the detective vehicles don't tend to do that, and the investigation vehicles don't do that, but all our vehicles have that capacity, and there's no SUV that's structured like that, right? I mean, no electric, totally electric that's structured like that. But we found out there's a hybrid, and it's not a plug-in hybrid, so it's not the most efficient, but our vehicles get 16 or 17 miles a gallon now, and at least the hybrid gets 23. So that's an increment. So we decided that that was a good compromise, and that we would be able to sell it to the police department, and also show that we were still saving about 15% of the gas consumption for police patrolling. So we went through all that logic in our report to kind of really make a case that we can't have electric vehicles right now. Maybe we can in 2035, but we can have hybrids, and they will at least move us along in greenhouse gas reductions. Again, I showed graphs about the numbers count. It gets people's attention if you just focus them on, okay, this is what we're doing and this is where we can get to. And the other thing that was really important, 2 other things, was talking about neighboring communities. Croton has done tons of solar. Larchmont put solar on its ice rink, yada, yada. We can do this. And the other, and of course, the streetlight conversion was a big deal. And also we did try to locate some of the places where there could be grant funding and financial support and stuff for the community moving forward, because one of the big questions is always, how are we going to pay for some of this stuff? And my understanding, and Mary and others on this call may have more information, but there's a rollout of the Inflation Reduction in Infrastructure federal money, and it's trickling down to states. And there's a real strong belief that over the next year or so, there'll be a lot more money available to do some of these things in communities and new ways to access resources. The other thing is timelines. One of the things we found is our trustees were really overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, 39 recommendations, we can't do all this in 1 year. So in our report, we did, kind of titrate out over 7 years when we should be doing things. recognizing, for example, that we have to start figuring out how to do solar development now, but it won't be online for 2 or 3 years. We're not going to replace all the police vehicles with new vehicles this year. We're going to do every year there's 1 or 2 vehicles that get retired. We're going to do 1 or 2 a year. And so that cumulatively by 2030, we will have replaced half the fleet. So that really made it more palatable and understandable to both the staff and the trustees that it's just building these green alternatives into ongoing operations, which will result in the reductions over time. So here's an example of our village fleet timeline, and you can see the very first thing that we want to do is adopt an environmentally preferred purchasing policy, which is a climate smart community resolution, and we don't have it. And so it says, this is what we should be following. So we always first consider an environmental alternative when we're buying anything. And right now, the New York State has a green purchasing program that you can join. And I think I put that link in there, but it's definitely in our report. And you can sign up and you can look down their list, and they've already vetted more environmentally sound, even printer paper and things like that, and office equipment. So we really want that to be the mode of operation. And so we don't have another water heater that we buy that's not a heat pump water heater, for example. And then we're planning out when we're going to get electric vehicles. And so we do have a couple of administrative vehicles, and they're still hanging in there. But when those are replaced, there's no reason at all why they shouldn't be electric, because they're administrative vehicles. They're not police patrol vehicles. And the other thing is, I guess there was complaints that there's supply chain issues around garbage trucks. Green garbage trucks are happening, but New York bought them all or something. New York City bought them all. But the key thing is, if your garbage trucks are not used for plowing, it's very easy to have them be electric, because they don't have to have all that power for plowing, but they may need level 3 chargers, which is a different issue. So you need to plan for the charging infrastructure. So we're including that in our planning for transportation. We need the charging infrastructure, and we need to replace all our garbage trucks eventually with electric vehicles. And here's our renewable energy timeline. Again, this is going to be a big deal for the village to really try to accomplish this. We're going to start planning hopefully this year, but we're really not probably going to have that solar array up on our DPW building for another 2 years or 3 years. If everything goes well, hopefully it'll be 2 years. And then once we've done one, we may be able to figure out how to do others. But in our report, we only allocated the reductions based on getting the one big solar project done. And if we get more done, we'll reduce more emissions, which would be great. Then we broke it down just by this year, how to get started. And this is not in our report, but I can send a copy to Mary if other people want to look at it. But the trustee was really concerned about not overwhelming them. We can only do so much in a quarter. We have to do the budget. We have lots of other things to do. And so what we did is we took our first year goals and we broke them up into 5 or 6 per quarter. And then we allocated it by quarter. So our first quarter does have 7, I think. But the idea, again, is to make it feasible and palatable, and it's a really smooth roadmap for the trustees. So hopefully then it means it will get done. And this is just our last quarter. Excuse me. Where the last thing is we're going to have a report about what we've accomplished and then go forward. So this is kind of just a summary. Recognize the constraints, head off objections if you can. really remind everybody that there are costs for climate issues that aren't in the budget. Excuse me. You know, air quality, habitat, you know, the heating issues that affect individuals, costs around home insurance for flooding and things like that. Those aren't in the municipal budget, but they still will be affected by climate. And if we can reduce the climate impacts, then we're saving money in other sectors as well. We tried to be practical. We tried to look at what, you know, we knew we weren't going to get a new heating system in the library because they just replaced it. So that, you know, don't do that. Don't go there, but go to the energy efficient part of it. And then in 10 years, hopefully we can get a new system. And also remind everybody that things are changing. We may not be able to get a green garbage truck this year. We may have to wait for a year, but we need to get on the list. Here's a list of a few New York State, mostly grant resources. I think this is a good place to start. These pages are renewed and updated. And again, I think a lot will change over time in terms of you know, the next couple of years, more money, you know, being available. Sorry. So pitfalls, well, it's easy to do the low-hanging fruit, but that won't get you very far. So you do really have to have some ambitious goals in there. And again, the easier ones or the smaller steps don't tend to save enough greenhouse gas reductions. Business as usual is always easier. It's really hard to get into the municipality and make sure everyone's thinking like, well, if we're buying a new printer, buy an Energy Star one, not Energy Star one, that kind of thing. And also the whole issue about cost. Again, you have to keep reminding people that the cost is not just what's in the municipal budget. A lot of these steps will save money. And you know, we need to do it kind of thing. This is kind of just more of, you know, don't shy away from the hard things that you have to try to sell. Really invoke what other communities are doing, which we found very helpful. Set up these timelines and these steps so that the trustees and the staff really know what to do. And I'll stop there because we have, I do have to leave in about 15 minutes, but thank you to the Hudson Valley Regional Council, our GoCap planning group, and also to the village CSC that helped me work on this report. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Carol. It was really interesting to hear you talk about this from such a hands-on perspective. And we're about to, in the second part of this call, talk a lot about those things. So I'm going to have to rewrite my presentation really quickly because you covered so much what I was going to cover. So thank you. And I don't know if anyone has any questions or if you want to. I have a few questions, but I don't want to. I know there were some in chat as well, but I was wondering if you could, I'll start out and just ask about something that has come up a couple times and I know is something that some municipalities include and others don't in their CAP, which is a vision statement. And I don't know if you thought about that and if so, what your you know, what your thoughts were. I think you decided not to include a vision statement, if I'm correct, but just from looking over.
What we did, which I forgot to mention, was you'll see in our report, we have a letter from the mayor, which is really the vision statement. And I actually got that clue from another community, and I can't remember whose report I was looking at. So what we did is frame it we had the mayor frame it. And we also put that right up front in the draft report so that as the community saw the report, they already saw that the mayor was supporting this. And it is a very visionary kind of statement about, you know, the threats that we're facing, the fact that this is a global threat, that this is part of the New York State. Bronxville's made a lot of progress already, but these are the things we need to do to keep pushing to implement reductions. So that really became our vision statement, I think. Are there other questions, any other questions people have? In the chat, I saw that people are asking for resources to be posted, and I think they are.
Sorry, Carol, I was having some audio issues.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, this is so great. And I think if I post the presentation, and I think everyone has your email address too from the agenda that went out. So hopefully that's all right if people have follow-up questions, if they can contact you directly. I don't know if anyone else has any questions.
Oh, yeah. Someone asked for the links in the chat. Let me
I
see if I
actually
can.
already have posted your presentation.
Okay,
And
yeah.
I sent the link to that. So I think those links should work in the presentation, right?
Oh, yeah. Actually, Kale put up the link directly to the plan.
Oh, great. Right, even better.
Yeah, in the chat. Yeah, so again, I do urge you to look at the report because I just went through everything really quickly, and you can get examples around, you know, how we did the timeline in that report. You know, we had a different format than I think you have in terms of the report structure and so forth, because it was, you know, it was more a state level group, and it wasn't ICLEI, but you know, it ends up the same place. So we just have a different format, and it turned out that there was this whole grid that they recommended for, you know, different goals and action steps, which is in the back of our report, which you may or may not choose to include. And it's what makes our report really long compared to some other communities.
Emma, it looks like you have a question if you want to jump right in.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I don't know if you would know this, but do you know what like software you use to make the additional graphs in your report? I thought they looked very neat. I like them a lot.
It's just Excel. You do an Excel
okay.
chart, and then you export to a chart, you know, Excel spreadsheet, and then you expect, you know, and then you create a chart.
Mhm.
And you have to futz around a little bit about whether you want a bar chart or, you know, different formatting. But that's what I did. If you know how to use Excel, that's how
Perfect.
you do it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Carol, you're welcome to stay on if you'd like. We're going to be talking about clear path reduction measure modeling next. So if
Sure. I'll stay on for a couple minutes and then I have to run, but I appreciate the opportunity. And if anybody wants to email me, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, I will turn it over to Caroline. I know some of you have had some recent questions on the reduction measure modeling. I've been tracking so far. It looks like almost everyone has modeled at least one reduction measure from this cohort. So that's great. Congratulations. Love to see that progress. And that's on top of the business as usual forecasting. So, you know, I think Carol is saying it's been helpful for Bronxville. I think the municipalities that we've worked with have found it really useful as well, as to have a data-driven rationale for recommending some of these various strategies. So I will turn it over to you, Caroline.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So we can treat this more as Q&A for me. If anyone has any questions about reduction measure modeling, feel free to jump in. The one question I've got, I think most frequently, has been on modeling solar in ClearPath. So I'm happy to demonstrate that. But maybe I'll open the floor for a second and then we'll go from there.
Actually, if you could model the solar piece, I'm sorry, this is Judy from White Plains. That would be helpful for us because we were wondering how we sort of take credit for the solar that our community solar arrays, the kilowatts that they give back to the grid. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah, that might be a better discussion for office hours because we might have to get a little bit more detailed with,
Okay.
you know, the community power that you're buying and how that's connected to your own electricity use. Or yeah, that one might get a little bit too complicated, but
Okay.
I am happy to show.
Just to Justin, we need to sign up for office hours, so we're gonna sign up for office hours. Thank you.
Great, but I am also happy to show you just how to use ClearPath to model solar in general, if you'd like, or everyone can raise hands if they'd like to see that anyway.
The other, it's Judy again, I'm sorry. This other question that we had was how to model demand response, like if we put demand, like if we sign up more of our municipal buildings for the grid rewards, for instance.
Yes, that is most likely through user defined, but again, so do you know how much energy will be saved by signing up for that? Are there estimates from that program?
We're working on getting that from our provider.
Okay, yeah, so I'll share screen.
Never follow.
Yeah, so this is a good question actually, because it just comes back to the user defined calculator in ClearPath, which can really be used for any emissions reduction. You just need a little bit more data on your end in order to use it. So let me navigate there so I can explain this a little better. So as usual, on your home page under government track, we're going to go to the planning module. And I'll actually make this a little bigger for you all. So under the planning module, just as a reminder for anyone who hasn't played around with this as much, to add new reduction strategies into your ClearPath account, which you can then add to your planning scenarios, which are listed down here. You can click on new reduction strategy. And from here, we have this web page where it shows all of the calculators that are available. And as I've mentioned in some previous meetings, I always like to use this filter feature to find the right calculator by sector. I find is the easiest. So for demand response program, that would go under buildings and facilities. And then the calculator I was just mentioning that you can really use for any reduction measure that you can think of, it would be this user defined buildings and facilities. And so it's a pretty simple calculator because it relies on you providing the data that's needed and making the estimates of energy savings essentially. So as usual, you would name it, make sure you have the right global warming potential selected. So it's the global warming potential you used in your inventory. And then where the kind of customization within this calculator comes is this affected forecast series. So any reduction measure that you want to model, such as demand response, you want to find the emission source that it's impacting. So for demand response specifically, we'd look at electricity. But I should also mention at this point, I've had some questions around wanting to model electrification of heat pump or other fuels that are used in buildings. So you would also be using this calculator for that. But for demand response, we would use electricity. And then you have to answer this question. Does this measure reduce electricity or change the carbon intensity of the grid? And because demand response just allows kind of net electricity savings and it's not impacting the type of electricity you're purchasing, you would select that reduce electricity use. So that change carbon intensity is really related to changes to your electricity grid. So adding solar that impacts the grid. Yeah, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated, and I would recommend coming to office hours if you have questions on that. But again, for demand response, we're looking at just electricity consumption, reducing that consumption. And then this primary driver, most times in local government operations, you can ignore it. There is a good explanation here, but it's really just used for in the case that you want to scale up an action. So say you want to, this doesn't even apply to demand response, but I want to explain it. It's a little bit more clear in general. But by scaling up, I mean, if you want to, add 5 solar panels one year, but then the next year you want to do 10 panels, and then the next year you do 15 panels. So that's where the primary driver comes into play. But usually with local government operations, you're just doing kind of one bulk action at a time. So you can just leave the primary driver as 1. And then the last piece, or the last kind of main piece of information you need to add, is your actual total energy savings. So if your demand response program can give you an estimate of, say, 20% electricity will be saved by using this program, you can find 20% of your electricity use. Using your inventory is usually how I would recommend doing that. And then just inputting that electricity savings per year into this field. And then in terms of effective useful life, I'm just gonna, you would want to bump this up past, well, I guess with demand response, it's kind of funny. If you're only using demand response for 1 year, the effective useful life of that program would be 1 year. But if you're using it for 5 years, it would be 5 years. If you're planning to use it throughout the rest of your forecast, I would just enter 10 to ensure that your emission savings count for 10 years. And then it's not cumulative because it's just 20% electricity savings per year. Does that make sense to everyone? I know it's a little weird to be talking about using this for one specific action, but also sort of broadly. So yeah, please jump in if you have more questions.
I think that was very helpful. Thanks, Caroline.
Great.
Any other questions just on these reduction measure modeling while Caroline has this open? Oh, looks like Emma.
Yeah, I was trying to do like vehicle fleet electrification. Is there any way to model that without knowing the vehicle miles traveled? Because we don't have data on that. And when I tried all the templates requested VMT.
Yeah, so I think you're with Peak Skills. Is it okay if I pull up Peak Skills?
Yeah.
ClearPath account? Okay, great. Because I think we added estimates for VMT to, I know at this point everyone has completed their BAU forecast. So in order to do that, you had to estimate VMT using some methods I had to share with some, because some of you didn't have VMT and some did. So it's been a little bit ad hoc for me on that one. But I'm pretty sure we added that. I just want to check. Okay, so, and for anyone who's doing reduction measure modeling that didn't complete a BAU forecast, it is really useful to go into the business as usual forecast and find some data, depending on what you're modeling. So I would recommend basically doing what I'm doing, showing right now on ClearPath. If you go to apply growth rates, the sort of summarized activity data and emissions based on emission source and activity data will appear here. So this is buildings and facilities, but we want vehicle fleet. Yeah, so we added, I don't remember who did this, Emma, for Peak Scale. But you can always find fleet-wide VMT right here. So whether you put it in your inventory or calculated it separately and added it here, this is where you would find that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Good question. Any others? Dominique, did you have a question? Oh, maybe not anymore. Okay.
Caroline, I guess while we still have you, it'd be great to, let's see the solar demonstration. I think that would be helpful.
Great. I can do that. So I am actually going to go to Terry Tan's account, thinking that that's okay, because I presented, I used them as a presentation example last time. So I modeled, I don't know if you all remember, but I did some modeling of solar for them, and I presented it at our last meeting in December. So I figured I would just show you how I modeled theirs, because it's more relevant to your communities in terms of like electric grid decarbonization and all of that. But so under Terrytown, I want to go to planning. And so we have this reduction measure analysis planning scenario. We can go to, well, I'm going to come back to that later because I have not modeled this yet. So I'm going to go to new reduction strategy and again, use the filter feature. And I have some extra calculators under here because I'm using an admin account through ICLEI. But you just want to find the solar photovoltaic installation and select that. And I'm actually going to use the one that I created just to make it a little bit easier to show you exactly where I found the values that were used for them. So what is it? Yeah, this buildings and facilities. Okay, so as usual, you will name your reduction measure or name of the calculator you want. And then make sure you have the correct factor sets selected. So the factor sets that were used within your inventory, you can always go and check your inventory records to find which factor sets were used. And then there are two key pieces of information you need to find to model solar. And we're actually, so this first one is the size of your solar array in kilowatts. So typically a contractor would give you an estimated system size that they would be building, in a field or on a rooftop. So you could use the value that your contractor has given you, or we have a way using this NREL PV watts tool that's linked under energy impacts. You can use this tool I'll show you how to use it. You'll just draw the size of the system on a rooftop in your community and use that to get the system size. So I'll go to Terrytown. And this first page that pops up after you search for your community is really just confirming that it's the right location. So I know that that's where Terrytown is located. So I can hit this big orange arrow. And then this is a little bit funky because it looks like the PV Watts tool is asking you to add information, and it is, but you can also use this page to gather some information. So like I just mentioned, we are going to use the tool to estimate the size of our system. So you can use this rooftop size estimator. It's a little bigger. And so you click on this little box under rooftop size estimator, and then this does give you a little tutorial that you can look at, but it's pretty short, so I'll just hit close. And then this isn't the exact building I used in Terrytown, but just to show you how to use this tool, you actually just click to add new dots. And then once you have at least 3, they'll connect. And you can adjust them by just moving them around a little bit if you want to get a little bit more particular with matching the rooftop or the field that you're doing this for. And then already PV Watts up above has calculated the size of that system in kilowatts. And it looks a little bit funky here because it's saying your kilowatt size system for a DC specific. DC is just a type of power supply. Like if you think of it in terms of DC versus AC power, that kind of clicks for people a little better, but you're really looking at just the 55.1 kilowatts. And if you hit save, it'll actually automatically populate here. So you can also grab that number for here, where it is a little bit more clear that it's kilowatts of the DC system. So then we're just going to take this 55.1 number and input it here. I'm not going to change it because 70 was what I gathered from a Terrytown specific building, and I don't want to mess up their record, but that is exactly how I got this 70 number, is just using this NREL PV Watts tool. And so that's the size of the system. the other number that I have gotten quite a few questions on because it is a little bit confusing, this generation potential number. So this is looking for the kilowatt hours per kilowatt of installed solar. And so what that unit is referring to is essentially how much electricity can be produced per kilowatt of the system installed. So that value is, a number of factors are going to come into play with that. Your latitude, so how close the sun is to your location, climate, and other variables that are location dependent. And so we can also use this NREL PV watts tool to gather this number. And so we go back to PV watts and we go back to Terrytown. And then it's usually pretty quick, but my Wi-Fi might be bad today. So again, just confirm it's at the right location. And it's pretty general at this point. It doesn't have this like orange or red dot, doesn't have to be to your specific building. It's really just the location of the town that you're looking for here. And so again, we want to go to system info. And this is where it's a little funky and some explanation is needed. So here to get this generation potential that I was just talking about, again, that's the power that's able to be produced per kilowatt or estimated. I kind of like to think of it as estimated efficiency of the system. So how much power can be produced per kilowatt in your location. And so to get that, we can actually just change this to a 1, because that'll give us a 1 kilowatt system size. So this tool can then calculate an estimated kilowatt hours for a 1 kilowatt system. So that's really PV Watt's main system, or main purpose, is estimating the total kilowatt hours of a system, of a solar array. So if I do just a 1 kilowatt system and I hit go to PV Watts, you'll get this 1283. And so this is where we get kilowatt hours per year, or kilowatt hours per 1 kilowatt. So again, we just want to take that 1283 and plug it in here. And yeah, that's kind of it. I know these terms are a little confusing. So please let me know if you have questions. And you can actually leave these down below the same, because 20 years is the expected lifetime of a solar array system. And then it's not cumulative because you're not adding new solar each year. You're just adding that one system and having these 306. You're having this total electricity savings per year.
Caroline, does that estimate assume a particular, an idealized angle of the panel for that latitude, longitude, or I'm just wondering if there's other assumptions that we need to change for certain reasons?
Yes, that is a great question. So you could do that on this system info page. Maybe I'll actually go to the beginning just to, I feel like it takes a while to get used to PV Watts, so helping everyone see the process of using it is helpful. So again, I'm going to go to Terrytown, and it's the right location. So go to system info, and this system info tab is where you can change some of those variables. And it really depends on what you're planning or expecting, or if you're working with a contractor, you might have some of this information, but it's not needed to do modeling in ClearPath. Again, remember, these ClearPath models they're estimations, right? So these factors aren't going to impact your emissions savings greatly in ClearPath. So it's good practice to do it, certainly if you have that information, but if you don't have that information, don't worry about it. And if it's too complex for you, that's totally fine. The one I will call out though is, you might as well change this array type from open rack, or what you would see on the ground, to this fixed roof mount, because that will be more accurate for a roof if you are looking at a rooftop solar array. Yeah, and if you want to get a little nerdy and look into the tilt of the system you're looking at and the direction it'll be facing, you can certainly use PV watts to add that information and get more accurate data. And these little information symbols are helpful with that as well. Any other questions? And Dean, did that answer everything? Great. I realized I showed you how to fill out this calculator. I didn't show you how to add the reduction measure to your planning scenario. Do people want to see that again? Do we need a reminder on that, or is everyone feeling pretty comfortable with the planning scenario and adding measures to it?
Sorry, I'm new here, but what are your office hours and how can I?
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, no, Dominique, I'm happy to send you the information, but every Tuesday from 10 to 11 are office hours. So I will make sure that you are on the invite list.
Thank you.
And Caroline, we should maybe move on. So I feel like this is a great place to stop, but in terms of follow-up questions, I think office hours is the best place to come and pick Caroline's brain further. But thank you. Okay, I want to make sure that we have time for breakout rooms, because as you may remember, I put each municipality into a small support cohort group, sort of a mini cohort. And the idea behind this is to have another layer of support. And I'm going to, I've set up breakout rooms along the lines of those mini cohort groups. So you should be familiar with them. And if you could speak to next steps on support, I think that would be a valuable use of time. So in other words, do you want this cohort to be a group that you use as an extra set of eyes on your climate action plan? And if so, this would be a good time to decide on that and decide on timing, exchange emails if you don't already have each other's emails, and figure out kind of when you want to exchange those caps. My sense is that many of you don't have a draft done yet, but in the next month or so, hopefully that will change, and that will be a good time for you guys to maybe exchange reports with each other and to review them. I'm also here as an extra set of eyes to read the report, so feel free to use me as well. And in addition, maybe you also want to talk about ongoing challenges with stakeholder meetings, or anything that you're finding is a challenge at this point. So we don't have too much time, but I'm going to open up the breakout rooms, and then we'll convene back, and I'll talk more about the template and some tips and guidance, and then I'll talk about some next steps and important announcements. So before I let you in, anyone have any last minute questions?
Mary, how many minutes do we have in the rooms?
I think 12. Oops, and here we go. Sorry. 12 minutes.
meeting. Mary, I guess I wasn't entirely clear. What are we talking about right now?
Yeah, what's our theme?
So the big question is, do you want to use this group as an extra set of eyes to review your climate action plan? So the way that would work would be when you're done, you forward it to the other two team members for review, and they send their comments back to you. As I said, I'm also happy to review a report. You don't have to do this. I don't want to force anyone into anything, but you know, it could be a valuable way to not only help each other, but also, you know, to learn from each other's reports.
I'd be open to that. What do you
Does that
think,
make
Libby
sense?
and Justin?
I'm open to that as well, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful.
Agreed.
Great. What is the timing looking like? What do you all think for when a draft might be ready for each other to review?
I mean, we're still fairly early in the process because we've now met with all of the various departments and we're waiting on their responses, and then we'll work to put together the draft. But I mean, so I'm not sure exactly, but I think it's still, you know, probably at least a month out.
I'm gonna second that for
Yeah.
for the city of White Plains. We are also very early in the process, so and I think that the Bronxville presentation was very helpful because it solidified for me some of the things that we've been talking about internally in terms of what we're going to put into our plan and how to represent it. So that was helpful, but I do think we need about at least 3 weeks or a month to have something ready to share.
Yeah. And I suspect, I mean, I think the Bronxville has, in some ways, it's just a much smaller community. So I imagine there's just fewer stakeholders that had to be talked to, and fewer things that will be in there compared to White Plains, and certainly compared to the county.
Yeah, absolutely. The scale is different, but you know, the whole idea of sort of focusing on doing things in increments, and as things and reach the end of their useful life to pay, you know, those sorts of things, I think are helpful for me to be reminded of. So
Emma, how about peak scale?
Yeah, I think about a month sounds good for us too. I mean, I've started making edits to like the, you know, the template you provided, but we need more stakeholder meetings, definitely.
Okay, well,
yeah.
sounds like maybe you want to regroup then at the, you know,
Hmm.
if it's a month out, maybe just talking again at the next meeting would be a good idea. Or if, yeah, I don't know. Do you guys have each other's email addresses at this point? Maybe not.
I don't know if I do. I mean, probably good
Okay.
to
Are
share.
you all comfortable if I share everyone's email address with each other? I just wanted to confirm. Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so
have,
why don't
I
I
have
do that?
everybody's except for Emma's.
I can share in chat if that's easiest.
Perfect. That would be great, Emma. Thank you. Yeah, and then you guys will have each other's email addresses, and you can take it from here. I think you know, you can see where you are in a month. You're the biggest group, right? You guys are the 3 largest communities. So I understand things are going to be taking longer with the stakeholder meetings, among other things. So
Is there anybody missing from this cohort group? The big ones? I can't
nope,
think of.
just the 3, the county,
Yeah,
White
okay.
Plains, and Peekskill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the cities. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I know there's some stakeholder meetings that have already happened and some that are planned for all of you. So that's great to hear. Any other challenges, red flags you want to share with the group that you're finding?
I think, you know, for us, it's not even not a red flag. Just the challenge is that this all seems to be taking a lot longer than the inventory did, because the inventory was just describing what the reality was, which isn't as potentially, there's no politics really involved in that. I mean, a small amount, but mostly just this is what it is, like it or not. And now that we're in the sphere of trying to make recommendations, I think everybody is understandably a lot more invested in making sure those recommendations are gonna substantively work, but also be politically, okay for people to sign off on.
Yeah.
How many recommendations are you thinking you'll include in the plan at this point? Do you have an idea yet, Elijah?
No, I mean, the way that we sort of looked at it was we took that long Excel of all of the various possible strategies, some of them, and Pete and I went through it, and we sort of, a few of them crossed out right away because we've already done that. The county's been doing it for years, well before 2019, so it wouldn't go in the report for future action. A couple we crossed out because they're things that seem to not be relevant for the county, like changing zoning laws, which we don't zone at the county level. And then for everything else, that's what we've been kind of putting out to the various departments to understand what's already underway. First of all, what got done in the last 4 years that we can talk about in the report, because it's since the baseline year. What's already underway, what else could we put underway, and are there any obstacles to doing some of these things that are recommendations? And then I think the plan is, once we get that sort of response back from the various departments, then Pete and I can sit down and kind of take from there. All right, now which of these, do we basically want to recommend anything that's not otherwise precluded?
That
And
sounds
I
like it makes a lot of
say-
sense.
we also started with the list of, that laundry list of actions that Miriam and I had developed at the CAPI meeting. And then I tried to sort them into, so I did sort them into 3 categories, sort of mitigation, things that fall under mitigation, which was, reducing municipal energy use, electrifying the vehicle fleet, upgrading the HVAC equipment, and investing in renewable energy. And then policy goals, which were things like green purchasing, recycling, purchasing recycled paper, etc. And then adaptation, which was conserving natural resources and the tree inventory, which didn't really. So that's the sort of frame that I was looking at. Then, as I was even just speaking to the team here at the planning department about the inventory, it became clear that, and I haven't even had a chance to talk to Miriam about this because it all happened over the holidays, Miriam, so my apologies. Miriam and I had different schedules over the holidays. So just the thinking of, we need to do a deeper dive into we've had some discussions here about the fact that the downstate energy grid is not all that clean, and that electrifying and moving all to electricity has its own issues, that electric car batteries have their own issues, and solar panel have their own issues. So it occurred to me, even just doing the greenhouse gas inventory that had, some basic like next steps. So we have put together sort of a comprehensive list of data on sort of what I'm calling the other side, like what are some, and we need to sort of take a long look at that before we go forward with our January presentation, Mary, that you'll be at. And then see about leaning into the sorts of climate actions that are unambiguously positive, like electricity reduction goals, right? Or energy use reduction goals, energy use audits, demand response, like the things that are just 100%, like regardless of where the energy is coming from, this is what we should be doing. So it seemed to me like we need to back up a little bit before we can go forward, which is why I'm saying that I think we need a month till we get this plan together.
That's so interesting. That's such positive, such interesting and helpful feedback. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I hope that the clear path reduction measure modeling can be helpful with, some of the doubters, so to say, right? The people who aren't seeing, there's obviously the co-benefit section, but there's compelling reasons to show people the chart, right? Like how steeply things go down when you do switch over to heat pumps, for example. So, I don't know if that will help assuage some of those people, but I like the idea of, leaning into the easier ones, the easier cells, and then
The unambiguous ones.
the unambiguous ones, yeah.
Mary, one of the things that that sort of was what started this was when Melanie Patapsis shared with us the community greenhouse information that NYSERDA did, and that, White Plains was one of the places that had seen increases in greenhouse gas emissions. And when we questioned her about that, she said that's because when Indian Point came offline, the grid got much dirtier. So I just want to be prepared to answer all of that, and I have to know more information before I can feel comfortable doing that. So,
Yeah.
Miriam, that's what we're talking about tomorrow, by the way, at our meeting.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Our chief of staff just called me, so of course, anytime I am on the phone or something, I have to answer. So
Yeah.
sorry.
No worries. We
so
only
we'll
have
meet-
about 1 more minute though. So I did want to make sure that Emma, if you wanted to contribute anything with regard to challenges or issues you're facing, that you have time, a little bit of time.
Yeah, I was one thing that helped me with that Bronxville presentation was seeing how she laid out like a timeline for the tasks, which I really would like to include in ours, and I hadn't even thought about yet. But I think that will be so helpful to let, the stakeholders know they're not getting thrown 30 tasks the first day we start implementing this plan,
I
Yeah,
totally
absolutely.
agree. I thought that was really valuable as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a great segue into what I'm about to talk about, which is implementation. So I'm gonna send
I
this
add-
back and
Mary, this is Peter. You guys hear me?
yeah, sure.
Do we have time for one more comment, or do we have to go back
Yeah,
to
no,
the?
sure, absolutely.
I mean, I just responding to what Judy said from White Plains, like it shouldn't. Maybe we should have a cohort discussion about. It's an important topic, but it feels to me like all of our communities should commit to electrification. I mean, I know there are concerns with the grid, but utilities and state and federal funders are working really hard to retrofit the grid to adopt to electric technologies, and that's not going to be effective unless we're trying to electrify at the local level. Or I could be wrong, but I feel like having all of our communities on the same page about the strategy would be important. And even if it's not saying like, okay, we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the next 2 years, let's just call it electrification then, because it seems like that's an important policy goal.
Yeah, I'm not saying that White Plains isn't committing to that. I hope nobody heard that. I'm just saying that we clearly need to do, I feel like I need to do more research gathering about it. But so I did not mean to say that at all. Just that there's homework. We have homework left to do. So
Yeah,
Right,
I
and-
hear what
and-
you're saying.
And maybe
Makes sense.
prioritization, but I think it's a great point, Peter, and to be continued. So, all right, thank you all, and I'll see you back in the main room.
Great.
Great, thank you all. And I'm gonna now just finish up with a presentation on some areas that we haven't yet really discussed in detail. And obviously, feel free to jump in and ask any questions along the way if you have any. I'm gonna share my screen. All right, can you all see my screen? I hope. Yes.
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 Fantastic. Great, thank you. All right, so the main 3 things I'm going to hit on today are the vision statement, implementation planning and monitoring and reporting, and then I'll end up with some announcements and next steps. So we've covered, I think, to date, pretty much most of what is required from the climate smart communities, and also what isn't contained in the ICLEI template. But there are some variances between the CSC requirements and the template, and I just wanted to make sure that I covered those. The first is the vision statement. This is what you'll see if you go to page 11 of the template. There's a section called Vision Statements and Objectives. Now, the reason this is included is what ICLEI has written here in the first sentence, or in the first couple lines, that basically having a vision statement is a great way to more effective way to create change. That if you have a vision statement, that it ultimately is more powerful than just the data alone. So it is recommended. There are some vision statements here that are included for your for your viewing. I think you can edit them as you see fit. You can leave them. I think the key thing to understand here is that first of all, this is not a CSC requirement. And while I think vision statements can be very powerful, they do really entail broad stakeholder engagement and agreement on a guiding principle around which everyone can agree. So they can also be very time consuming and contentious and distracting. So just something to keep in mind. I think this is really your choice, but it's important to know that almost all of you are going to be participating in CAPI Adapt, and we're going to be talking about visioning in CAPI Adapt because under CSC PE7, the Climate Adaptation Plan, there is a requirement for a vision statement. And this requirement requires that you reference not only mitigation, but also adaptation. So if you're thinking ahead, which I think it would make sense to do, I would recommend starting with a vision statement that includes both mitigation and adaptation. And that way you can, as you have your stakeholder meetings, you can actually reference this vision statement. You can maybe even have a separate slide on it, bring people's attention to it, and start to get feedback. This is going to be obviously an iterative process, but this slide that you're looking at right now actually is the exact wording from PE7 on the CSC requirements. And you'll see in the fourth bullet, it actually requires that you share the draft vision with the community and you establish a system for receiving public comments and revise the draft vision and goals based on stakeholder feedback. So this is almost, this is something that will continue if you decide to do it for really the entire 2024 as we go through, as we end CAPI, the CAPI program, and move on to CAPI Adapt. However, this is all optional. So I just want to make sure you realize that if you don't want to do anything having to do with vision, you can take it out entirely. You can do what Carol did in Bronxville and have the mayor, for instance, write a letter and make that sort of your vision statement at the very beginning of your climate action plan. But if you decide you do want to include a vision statement from the get-go, here are some sample vision statements that include both mitigation and adaptation, because some of the ones in the template only, as I mentioned, only include mitigation. So I wanted to make sure that you had a sense of what these sort of some sample vision statements are that include both. And I think, these are powerful, as I mentioned. It's wonderful for municipalities to have this sort of guiding principle, but this vision statement also doesn't need to be really complex, and it doesn't need to be, it's supposed to be very high level and broad. So, there really aren't that many avenues you can go down that are that different, my opinion is, than what I've written here. So feel free to use these to edit them and think about what you want to put in. But I would recommend, if you are going to have a vision statement, that you include one that includes both mitigation and adaptation. All right, any questions on that before we move on to implementation? No, okay. So an implementation plan is actually a CSC requirement. So having some sort of description or chart that really provides ways for your climate action plan to be implemented is required. I call this the who, what, and when. And this is something that is already included to a certain extent. So for instance, this chart that you've already seen and we've talked about, I think already includes both the who and the what, right? So you see here the lead actor column. That is who is responsible for these actions. And the metric is what it is that you're actually going to be monitoring. So in this case, number of streetlights replaced with LEDs. That is the KPI. That's something you're going to be coming back to and say, okay, how are we doing? How is the success right here? So the last section that really hasn't been addressed in that chart is the when. And Carol talked about having this as well, right? Like a chart that actually details when your municipality intends to implement each of these recommended strategies. This is an example from the town of Saugerties. I think this is the simplest that I've seen, where they just have the strategies on the left and the year on the right. And in some cases, they've even had quite a broad range. The green fleet procurement, they said 2019 to 2024. You can make it a little more detailed. This is actually taken from Bronxville's CAP. I know she showed one in her presentation. This is, I think, a little bit of a different format, but very similar. So they have the columns, each being the year, and then they've just X'd out what they're going to do in each year. I like this because you can very easily go to each year and say, okay, 2024, here's what we're going to do, 2025, et cetera. And they've broken it down by sector, which I think is also very valuable. The city of Tempe, I like what they did. They have not only the chart that I just mentioned, but to the side of that, they include an additional section called collaboration, where they talk about key partners, and they include organizations, businesses, and the city. So that is an extra layer of detail, which in some cases, I think it can be very valuable to really thinking through early on what it will take to get some of these strategies implemented. And then I think this is the most comprehensive that I've seen. It's from the city of Columbia, Missouri, and all of these I've linked to on the CAPI website. But what they've done is they've created a broader, I'm sure this is just an Excel sheet, but they have not only categorization, which they've called lever, right? Is it a policy recommendation? Is it education? Is it a business practice? And then they've put a time frame, so short, medium, long term. They have a lead entity, that's the who. And then they've said potential partners right here, which again, I think shows that they really thought through these actions and what it will take. And then they've included cost, funding strategies, and key next steps. So this I think is a great framework. Again, it's not mandatory to put all of these in. I think the partners strategies, funding strategies, for instance, even cost is not critical, but we've talked about, having $1, $2, $3 dollar signs, and I've included that information for you. So hopefully you can at least get to that level of inclusion. Because again, I think, the more you think about these upfront, the more, or the better prepared you'll be to actually be able to implement these. And then here's some examples of next steps if that's what is appropriate for these additional feasibility studies, further outreach, identification of funding sources, key partners, making necessary changes to local policies, gathering bids, et cetera. And then, of course, these are implementation considerations, which really are relevant across the board. And we've talked about these a lot before, so I'm not going to go into detail there. But in terms of monitoring and reporting, that's sort of the next bucket that is a requirement to include. And here again, there's a bit of a divergence between what's in your template and what ICLEI is recommending and what the CSC requirement is. And I just want to make sure you're aware of this because there is some choice here. I think the recommendation from ICLEI, and I think there's a lot of validity behind doing this, is is having action reports, which are basically status updates every 2 years, and doing a full inventory update every 4 years. So that's what's in your template. The CSC requirement says that there should be regular monitoring of progress towards meeting the greenhouse gas targets and reevaluation of targets and strategies against current state policies and technologies. So that doesn't mandate a specific time frame. They only say that an actual update of your inventory should happen every 10 years. Your inventory and your plan. So if your inventory is updated, then your plan should be updated as well. So again, a little bit of a difference there. I think it's important to think about what's optimal, what's relevant, and what's realistic for your municipality, and to only include what you really think you can accomplish. You'll see this chart here in the template, and I know some people have had some questions about this because it's not intuitive necessarily, but it is basically saying exactly what I just went over, that the status updates will happen every 2 years, that's the action reporting, but that you only need to update your entire inventory every 4 years. That's called the full reporting. Now, some municipalities have gone farther than that, and the town of Gardner is one example where they have created something called a CAP scorecard. There are a number of these out there, and this is something that they've committed to doing every year, which is basically to say, okay, here is our goal, here are baseline emissions, how far are we towards meeting that goal, and to update that in a very quantitative way every year. So again, just up to you to determine if this is realistic for you and if you want to include this. But if you do, let me know. I can provide this tool for you. And then some questions that have come up. How detailed does the timeline need to be? Because there is a requirement for a timeline on the process of your CAP activities. And I've outlined here a CAPI timeline, which you're welcome to leverage and put into your plan if you want, or to use it as a starting point for coming up with your own timeline on the process of creating this CAP. Obviously, it will differ from municipality to municipality, so you should look closely at what these dates are and make sure that they're or edit as needed for your municipality. Another question that has come up is what degree of public outreach is needed. All that the CSC requires is that there's an opportunity for the public to review and comment on the draft climate action plan. So what you could do is include a link to the webpage link, the link that allows people to give comments. You can screenshot that webpage as well. You can give example. I've seen people give examples of the comments that they've received, or the number of comments they've received. You don't have to do that, but that just gives you gives a flavor of how much public outreach you've done and how much of the municipality has been involved with this process. Others have given a list of all of the stakeholder meetings that should be in there somewhere. But although it's optional, this public outreach component, you will receive an additional 4 points for it, and I do recommend you do it, because it seems like most of you, if not all of you, are planning on doing this anyway, because it's critical to have stakeholder input, and I think it's kind of low-hanging fruit. Okay, I know we've talked a little bit about this already, how to make the plan stand out. Eye-catching and original graphics. I think you've heard from ICLEI how what they recommend, and there's some great examples. I think the Canva, Vista, all of those programs that are listed on the CAPI website are great to generate some of those. Many can be done in Excel as well. Having a message and a photo from a municipal leader. We saw that Bronxville did that. Many municipalities are doing that. And quotes too from municipal administration, from staff, from other stakeholders. Just you can pull those out, put them in the side so they stand out. I think making this more people oriented is always important to draw people in. Potential grant funding sources, people are always interested in how and where to get money from. And then the list of partners and potential partners is also, I think, shows that you've really, thought through how to make these actions effective and successful. What else to include? I think the implementation roadmap, we talked about that, making sure that, you talk about short-term versus long-term objectives and strategies. That can be done in a chart form, or, maybe you can come up with some other creative way to display that information. But a roadmap, I think, is a really effective way for everyone to see exactly what needs to be done and what the time frame is. The scorecard I talked about. Any relevant executive orders or resolutions that you've already passed might be something to consider. Many municipalities do that. They put it in the appendix, and that is an educational tool as well to help people understand what's already been done. A summary of the inventory report. You can, there are a number of choices here. You can either include a summary of the report in the body of the plan, and then you can also choose to include the complete plan. This is the inventory report, sorry, in your appendix of your plan. But you don't have to. It's really up to you. You can also just link to it, and the summary is probably good enough. I see many municipalities include that sort of main chart that has the summary of the emissions and the total emissions by sector. So that's something I think makes a lot of sense, because that's kind of one of the key outputs of the inventory report. And then for those of you who are in CAPI Adapt, which is almost all of you, you will be including an adaptation chapter, which is in that adaptation section, and that meets the requirements of CSC for PE7, the climate adaptation plan. So you can leave the standard template language for now, knowing that that will be updated during the CAPI Adapt process. All right, before I move on to homework and announcements, any questions? No. Okay. So this is not going to look much different. Finalizing your reduction measure modeling, continuing the stakeholder meetings, and potentially that vision statement I talked about. You might want to draw that out, put it on its own slide to give it, some extra visibility and encourage feedback on that. And then drafting your climate action plan. Hopefully by the end of February, you all will have a good working draft, if not before. And CAPI Adapt, important announcement. We have decided that Thursday, February 8th, will be the kickoff meeting. It will be in Peekskill, thanks to Peekskill, to Peter and the city for hosting us. That will be an all-day meeting, or 9:30 to 3:30, and I'll send more information on that shortly. So this all-day workshop will cover both the climate vulnerability assessment and the climate adaptation chapter. So hopefully, I think almost all of you, except for maybe for Hastings, is doing both of those. So in the case of Hastings, maybe just coming in the afternoon would make sense, but otherwise, all of you hopefully can stay for the whole day. ICLEI and the Hudson River Estuaries Program will be leading this workshop. So now is the time to recruit more CAPI Adapt team members as needed. I'll be reaching out to you all individually about your team for CAPI Adapt. You're welcome to bring up to 5 people to the workshop. If you want to keep the same members of your original CAPI team, obviously that will work. But I do recommend, if you can recruit more people, it will be useful. There will be much more of a community component to this CAPI Adapt. So outreach and community interaction will be a bigger part of it. So if you don't have any community volunteers, I think some of this work might be a little challenging. But there are CAPI Adapt website. The CAPI Adapt website has more information if you're interested on resources and who's needed, or I'm happy to talk to you more about it as well. Other announcements, by the end of the day, the CAPI website will be password protected. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that, where we've had some requests just to make sure that the information doesn't get out there to the general public. Some of it is somewhat sensitive. So the password for the sites for all 3 pages is CAPI-W. So please note that, and please try and keep that to yourselves if you wouldn't mind. And also, please request assistance if needed on the forecast modeling. Caroline and I are happy to help you with that. And I I think it can be really powerful, as we've talked about. So don't be shy. And please send us a link to your greenhouse gas inventory report on your municipal website if you haven't done that. This is both a Climate Smart Communities and a DEC requirement for this grant. It is an important step. If you're having any issues with that, let us know, and maybe we can talk about next steps. Yeah, and just in general, if you could check in with us on your status, that would be much appreciated. And please update your hours in SharePoint for September through December, if you wouldn't mind. That would be very helpful as I work on my fourth quarter report to the DEC. And our next CAPI meeting will be on February 1st. That will also be on Zoom. And then a week later, we'll be meeting in person in Peekskill on February 8th from 9:30 to 3:30. So that is it for me. I don't know if anyone has any last questions. We have a few more minutes.
Quick question, I'm sorry. You wanted us to share the link to our report that we have on our municipal website. With whom do we share that?
With me.
Got it. Thank you.
And I'm posting them all on the CAPI deliverables website. So you can all see kind of the status of everyone's reports. I'll send you that link right now just so you have it. And you can see also some of the other things that we've been doing, like the jam boards are there, and some of the analysis I've done comparing municipalities, which might be interesting. I know Carol was saying that she found that very helpful with some of the work that she did in Bronxville. So this page has already been password protected, but I will share it with you, and then you guys can practice entering in the passcode. I'll put it in chat right now, and you'll see that you'll have to put in CAPI-W as the password. I'll put that one more time here too. Yeah, and you'll see also that eventually I'm going to be posting everyone's your CAP document as well. And eventually those will go on your website as well, because you'll need to post it in order to get public feedback on it. But even once you have a draft, if you could share that with me, I'd like to, because I think it will help each other if we can see the drafts even. So we'll post the drafts, and then when you all have that up on your website, we'll be posting the link to the plan on the website. All right, any other questions, thoughts? All right, well, that's it for today. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you in February.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mary.
Bye.
Thank you.